So continuing our final discussion on Ivor Miller, we ended last time talking about how graffiti went mainstream. Graffiti got really popular. And in particular, it started showing up in museums. It started showing up in home decor. People wanted these paintings on their walls. One of the guys interviewed by Miller even says that folks came and said, could you design carpet for us to place your images on the carpet, on the welcome mat even. So very strange. Advertisers will start to use designs inspired by graffiti. So what's interesting in that is that while advertising inspired graffiti, now graffiti is going to come full circle, if you will, and inspire advertising so that it really starts to take off as some kind of mainstream image that one sees all the time. One doesn't have to be in New York to see these designs. Even high-end jewelry. You have an example of Paloma Picasso's jewelry design, and yes, that is the daughter of Pablo Picasso, who is inspired by this movement, inspired by these images. It's also going to inspire artists who never really were part of the graffiti movement, never really were part of the creolizing movement. And you'll see that Miller's interviewees talk about people like Keith Haring, Basquiat. These are fellows who became very famous for their art. You have images of them in your content folder here, following this video, following your reading of Miller. And these guys' images you may even recognize because they were so very famous at the time in which they were being done, well into the 90s. And Keith Haring died of AIDS as a young man, and all of the proceeds from his art goes to an AIDS foundation today. So his images are being used primarily for that, as I understand it. Basquiat also died at a young age, unfortunately, of drug abuse. So these young men, troubled in their own ways, expressing themselves through graffiti-style art, but as the artists being interviewed by Miller will say, these guys never painted on trains. These guys aren't part of the movement. And maybe they're a second movement, right? Maybe they're inspired by this art form to do something different. So take a look at those images that you have also in your folder on graffiti and art. Let's see, what else to say about this? This movement, if you will, does indeed go mainstream. It goes beyond New York. It goes into advertising. It goes into big-time retailing of art. It goes from city to city in the U.S. It goes international. And basically, Miller, in the end, sees this as a very interesting dilemma, right? Because this movement started out as a unique art form, something in the 70s and 80s. It started out coming out of a culture in New York, coming out of diversity, coming out of the civil rights era, coming out of a time when people were trying to identify who they were, and maybe using this art form particularly for communication. Maybe it just became that. As we said earlier, Miller doesn't go into the whole idea that this kind of communication, this kind of art, this kind of tagging was also co-opted by gangs. He suggests that the original artists doing this were trying to stay out of gangs, yet, of course, gang-related activity does pick up this form for communication, for marking territory. So it is a very interesting problem to work that out. He also says, Miller says that this is an art form that comes up at a particular time and place, related to a particular kind of culture. I find an interesting connection to Mary Ryan's discussion of the American Parade here, in that she too believes that that form of expression, cultural expression, was unique to the American city, unique to what was happening in the city in the 19th century at that time. Right? She too talks about diversity. She too talks about population changes. And so that is a very interesting connection perhaps to make. I'm going to have to talk over the fire engines. Again, reminding you, Miller sees this as an original form of art. He sees it, he calls it creolizing because he sees it as a form of communication, bringing together more than one language in order to create something new. It developed into a citywide movement, he says, that went national in our country and then eventually international. So your goal, I hope, is to try to make some sense of these primary source interviews that he does, try to make some sense of this art form. How does it help to identify culture, to identify people, to identify a city? And what does it say about us that some of us really embrace this form of art, right? Some of us see it as nuisance. Some of us see it as vandalism. Again, there's a video clip that you'll want to take a look at where Mayor Bloomberg is very upset that Banksy, this graffiti artist from England, has decided to come to New York and create some images around the city and create a little bit of disruption as he does it. And still, Mayor Bloomberg says that he's defacing public property, he's defacing private property, and that this is vandalism. And this is this is very recently, just in the past 5 years that this went on. So please do, if you haven't already, read this article, read those interviews, see what you think of it. And as you get to your job, your assignment on creolization, see whether or not the project you do can reflect some of the ideas that Miller is trying to get across. Thanks.